So this is part 3 of the Concepts and Terminology series that helps give us that comprehensive understanding of the game. And this one's on a super important aspect of comp matchups called the passive advantage, which is a critical part of being able to understand the tempo of fights in Overwatch. On the screen there's a list of all the videos I have planned for the series so far, but I'll add more as time goes on. If there's one you want to see first, let me know and I'll bump it up the queue. So when we talk about comp matchups, we're talking about that process of looking at the team comps both teams are playing, working out how they play by themselves, then working out how they're going to play into each other. And this process is one of the most fundamental parts of Overwatch. It's something we're doing constantly in-game, whether we realize it or not. It's so important because of the effect it has on our mindset, which, as we know from the first couple episodes, influences all the active and automatic decisions we make mid-game. When people look at comp matchups, one of the most popular ideas is looking at which team does more damage from range and which team does more damage up close, the whole idea of poke versus brawl. But this is very outdated, as all comps have a poke phase and all comps have a brawl phase. Comps with no poke potential at all still need to make rotations and skirmish to build ults before they engage, and comps heavily reliant on poke still need to push in and commit to close out fights. So it can be pretty unhelpful to try and squeeze comps into those definitions. When it comes to team comps, we care more about the way those comps perform their opening skirmish phase, and especially the things they need in terms of positions, ultimates, even range kills and so on, before they're ready to transition to that second phase where they commit to an engage. For example, a Monkey Ana comp typically skirmishes to get flankers in position and also build nano, then commits with a dive. A Rein Lucio comp skirmishes with long rotations and forcing objectives until the enemy is in range to speed boost onto you using ultimates. Or a Bull Pharah comp uses flank control and range spam to get opening picks or build ults like Barrage and Minefield, which then enable them to commit and clean up the fight. All comps have this two-phase playstyle in some way, and if the fight isn't decided by the first engage phase, then sometimes we see teams fall back into that skirmish phase until they're ready to engage again. I'll link an in-depth example of this process down below. This is related to the idea of uptimes and downtimes, but they aren't the exact same concept, because usually the skirmish phase refers to those initial movements in pre-fight, where we're setting up for a fight while still ready to disengage, whereas the uptime-downtime stuff typically refers to how team comps play after their first engage phase, where they're quickly stabilizing in cover to regain health and cooldowns, rather than fully disengaging. So we can see how it's possible to analyze team comps from the perspective of what they need from that opening skirmish phase in order to commit and win the fight. We can also imagine how those things they need, and the time it will take to get them, will change depending on what comp the enemy team is playing. Like, while that Monkey Ana comp might be fine using just Zarya Bubble and a Tracer flank for a dive in the mirror matchup, versus a BAP Brig Orisa comp, they might need nano, great flank angles, plus maybe even another ult like EMP, before they're in a position to fully commit. And if that Orisa team also has heroes like Tracer or D.Va contesting flanks, it would delay the Monkey team from getting the ults and positions needed to stage a successful engage, which would increase the time that Monkey team would have to skirmish before it can transition into the second phase. So when going from looking at comps by themselves to thinking about how they work in the matchup, we have to think about which things the teams have to earn during their skirmish before they can expect success from their engage, and most importantly, how long it will take them to earn those things. So where does the passive advantage come into this? Well, by looking at comp matchups from this perspective, we can see that although the time it takes to earn those ingredients for an engage isn't a constant, it is predictable based on the team comps, ult economy, and the area of the map the fight is happening. And with that in mind, we know that based on the comps, the ults, and the map, one team comp will complete that skirmish phase first, and be ready for a successful engage before their enemy are, provided that both teams are playing in passive or at least non-disruptive ways. And this is what the passive advantage is, the idea that if the fight extends organically without disruptive play, one team comp will inevitably build an advantage over the other as time goes on. This advantage can be in a few different ways, as we'll see with the examples, but that team should find it fairly easy to win the fight if they're allowed to complete their skirmish phase the way they want to. At its simplest level, this is something like a poke comp being able to win versus a Rein comp if both teams are chilling in main, but we usually see the concept in much more complicated ways. The main usefulness of this idea is partly how it helps us accurately predict the tempo of fights, but more importantly, how it tells us when we need to look for those creative and proactive plays that we're always going on about. Since if a team is at a passive disadvantage, they can't allow themselves to play in the passive way that will inevitably hand the fight to the enemy team. They need to look for some sort of disruptive or tempo controlling play. They need to find an advantage through tempo control to make up for their passive disadvantage. Again, at its simplest level, this would be that Rein comp knowing that they have to find a way to close distance and brawl before they take too much damage. But since those basic matchups are pretty much universal knowledge at this point, this concept is best at helping us identify less obvious examples of it. And we can see that in this situation here, where we're looking at an Ana Pharah comp attack versus a Rein comp on Anubis A. And although the Rein comp has some shield and range damage, we can see that the Ana comp should have the passive advantage, since they're free to skirmish around main, where they can spam to break the enemy shields and soften them up, the whole time converting any damage that Justice do into nano ult charge. Once they've got the nano, gotten some angles and done some poke, they should be able to make a strong engage that gives them the win. However, when we think about the passive advantage from Justice's perspective, we know that Justice can't allow that extended skirmish to happen. They need to find ways to both delay Paris from getting the things they need to engage, and ways to make disruptive tempo controlling plays that break apart Paris's default. And if we ignore Pharah's death for now, we can see that instead of allowing themselves to get flanked and spammed, they look for a proactive and disruptive play by finding and pushing the Hanzo on the right side, even walling off the exit to main, which enables them to catch the D.Va as well. So we can see how the team playing at the passive disadvantage is forced to play disruptively to win the fight, and had they not recognized they were at that disadvantage, they wouldn't have been looking for this type of play or been ready to commit to it. Then Paris's team comp could have slowly spammed and skirmished until their passive advantage was enough to take a successful engage. Understanding this concept encourages us to look for those types of plays when we need them. The passive advantage isn't just decided by team comps though, we also have to think about map geometry and the default playstyles of the teams. For example, looking at these two comps here, we might think that once again Paris is at the passive advantage, since they have range spam, ranged healing, and strong ultimates that they can build from a distance. All compared to Justice's comp, which has basically no range damage and no ranged heal to help their DPS on the flanks. However, once we start to think about playstyle, this isn't really that simple, since the default of the Lucio Moro comp is to stack up and overlap both the protection of their tanks and the group healing of their supports, which enables them to take long rotations through cover, during which the enemy spam won't be able to get picks. Through these rotations, they'll find strong positions in cover, usually in a position where they can force the objective, that are also close enough to push onto the enemy team. Then they'll skirmish with anyone nearby, converting any damage taken into support ult charge, until they have the ultimates that allow them to set up a push onto a target, typically with the Sombra setting up a hack or an off angle. We can see this matchup is happening on Lijiang Gardens as well, which has great roots for those early safe rotations, as well as an incredibly strong position on point where Justice can skirmish to build ults, or force the enemy to touch. So we can imagine that, playing in this playstyle, the Lucio Moro comp will safely get to point, then build their ults super quickly, mostly by converting Paris' spam into coalescence. And so, theoretically, they should be able to complete their skirmish phase and be ready to make an engage using ults, long before Paris' comp is in a position to take a successful one of their own. So by thinking not just about team comp, but the map and default playstyle as well, we can see that the team with a passive advantage isn't always just the team that has more poke. We aren't just looking at who does more damage in pre-fight, we're looking at which team is quickest at getting those things they need from their skirmish phase in order to commit to an engage that is likely to succeed. And that leads us to the second part of this example, that playing at a passive disadvantage forces teams to commit to something before they can set up that type of strong, full team engage. Sometimes that does just mean contesting flanks or taking surprise duels, like with Decay pushing to duel the Hanzo in that last example, but sometimes this means forcing entire engages to disrupt the enemy setup on a 6v6 level. And that's what we're going to see here. Paris' comp can't afford to chill and spam, allowing Justice to force point and build the ults. They have to coordinate early engages with the hope that they can quickly burst a target or, at the very least, force the enemy to use ultimates defensively. Unfortunately for Paris, Justice's comp is very well equipped to deal with these engages, since the comp has plenty of AoE healing and defensive cooldowns that allow them to tank damage and simply jump away to safety versus a big dive. The tanks have mobility cooldowns, Lucio has wall ride, Moira and the DPS have fade and recalls. Part of the comp's playstyle is walking in while holding those cooldowns, in case they need to escape from burst damage, so Paris will have a hard time succeeding with those early engages. But all that aside, the point I want to make is that since Paris are forced to make this type of engage, it is very predictable if we understand the concept. Since Justice know that Paris are at a passive disadvantage, they know that an attempt at a disruptive play will come in. The map and the comps only really allow for a certain type of play, where ball slams in with off angles from Tracer and Echo before Justice get to a secure position on the point. Since Justice knows this, it's very easy for them to be ready for it. Not only do they hold their defensive cooldowns in order to survive the engage, but Sombra is ready to find a hack on one of the DPS that she knows will be forced to take an aggressive angle. Justice survives the engage, Sombra finds the hack, the Tracer gets the pick, and now they're starting the fight with a huge advantage. So hopefully we can see how this is that deeper layer of comp matchups. We're not just looking at the basics of how our comp plays into their enemy, we're using our understanding of the passive advantage to make an accurate prediction of the tempo of the fight, which enables us to build an open-ended solution to that fight. Justice's solution was simple: rotate into position to threaten the objective, make sure we're ready to survive an enemy engage, try to catch an enemy using hack as they come in. Hack or no hack, as long as we survive, we can then stabilize on point and go back to working the passive advantage. And we can see how this again loops back to the idea of mindset, since we don't need complicated plans or shot calling to pull this off. We just need an understanding of how the passive advantage affects the tempo of the fight. So we've talked mostly about the passive advantage from the perspective of non-mirror matchups, where the team that has the advantage is fairly constant. But I want to make it clear that this idea still goes deeper. The team that is at the disadvantage and so is forced to make those disruptive plays can actually change from fight to fight over the course of the map. For mirror comps, this is usually due to changes in the ult economy. Maybe one team is at a large ult disadvantage and is therefore also at a passive disadvantage if they allow the fight to continue organically. Kinda like when we see teams go for surprise engages to disrupt Nanoblade or EMP setups. We also see these fight-to-fight changes on payload maps where there's a lot of variance in map geometry. Like how typically attacking teams have a lot of time and space to poke or set up ults on first point attack, but later on second and third point, there might not be enough spam angles or places to force the objective for that attacking team to still have the passive advantage. And this concept does actually still go deeper, since aside from the general passive advantage and the fight-to-fight advantage, we can also use the concept to think about actions happening during each fight. Here we're typically talking about things happening in that early skirmish phase, such as one team getting a surprise pick, and the other team realizing they need to make some sort of play before that first team can snowball their advantage in numbers. We can also see it with mid-fight tempo calling, usually when both teams are somewhat engaged already, but one team knows the enemy are close to building a vital ultimate, or maybe they see a hero like Ashe setting up an angle, so they know that they need to hard commit now before that ult is built, or that DPS does critical damage. I didn't really mean for this video to get so long, so I'll upload examples of those other types of passive advantage in a separate video. But for now, I hope that's a good foundation to an updated view on comp matchups. Remember, we don't care about which team pokes and which team brawls. All teams skirmish and all teams commit. Look for what those teams need before they commit, and work out which team will be the first to build those ingredients for a successful engage. Understand this concept, and you'll both be able to read fights before they happen, and use that knowledge to make the best decisions with regards to tempo control. Hopefully you enjoyed watching this one. It was a lot of fun to collect my thoughts together on such a crucial concept for modern Overwatch. If you did enjoy it and want to see more, please share it around and check out my Twitch, where I stream this type of content wherever I can, as well as kind of pro reviews, VOD reviews, that type of thing.